Joining me now from Colombo is Jehan Perera. He's the Research and Media Director of the National Peace Council of Sri Lanka. In Islamabad, Omar Waraich. He's the Amnesty International's Deputy Director for South Asia. And in Washington, D.C., we have John Lott. He's the President of the Crime Prevention Research Center. Gentlemen, welcome to all of you. John Lott, let me begin with you. Is bringing back the death penalty the best way to tackle a country's drug problem?
Well, it's a very effective way to deter criminals from committing crimes. You know, the issue that you have with drugs is just extremely difficult to stop them. The United States has spent hundreds of billions of dollars trying to stop illegal drugs coming in the United States, and I can't say that we've been particularly effective in doing that.
Okay.
The question is, if you're going to have those laws and going to try to stop them, what will be the most effective penalties to go and deter them? And the death penalty is an extremely effective method of deterring criminals.
So would you say that a stronger deterrent makes for a stronger country, a stronger society?
Look, drugs are a tough issue in the sense that when you make them illegal, you're going to create drug gangs and other groups that are going to specialize in trafficking them. I think there's an argument to be made for legalization, but if you do that, you're going to have more drug use. And so it's not nirvana. You basically have a choice between having lots of drug gangs, which are going to fight against each other to control drug turf and violent crime that results from that, or you're going to end up having more people using the drugs as the price goes down.
Okay, let me just switch over to Omar for a second. You believe that executions are not a show of strength, they're not a strong deterrent, but that it represents sort of the failure of a more humane society, correct?
Yes, executions actually aren't an effective deterrent. There's been lots of research done on this. I'm actually really quite surprised by what your guest said, where criminologists have, in study after study, demonstrated, and not least in the United States, so he should really be aware of this, that the death penalty is not a uniquely effective deterrent. Okay? This is just indisputable fact. Let me give you the example. And when it comes, by the way, to drug-related offenses, it is unlawful. It is a violation of international law to execute someone for drug-related offenses. We have examples of this. You don't have to look very far. In country after country, where we have seen that these coercive practices do not work. In this case, the death penalty is actually a very, very brutal practice. You were talking about putting people to death for drug-related offenses. Now, what President Sirisena has proposed in Sri Lanka, the problem that he has raised is actually one of the prison system. If he is saying drug trafficking is taking place in Sri Lankan prisons, that's a failure of the government. That is a failure of the prison authorities. In Iran, let's just look at the examples where there is high drug trafficking and high drug consumption. Iran has executed thousands of people, which I'd like your guests to actually go and have a look at. Thousands of people in grossly unfair trials, the vast majority of them for drug-related offenses, and the authorities have conceded that it has failed to produce a deterrent effect. There is no evidence that this is a deterrent effect. More than that, it is illegal under international law.
Okay, Omar and John, I see there's an interesting debate going on here, but I really want to bring Jehan in because he's also the third panelist in this. I mean, John, let me ask you, do you believe that the Sri Lankan government will actually go through with this and push this proposed law through?
My guess is that it will not happen. It is at the president's discretion because the president has the authority to reinstate or to activate the death penalty. The death penalty is in our law, but it has not been utilized by government since 1976. Now, the question is whether the president will actually go ahead because he has not shown himself to be very decisive over the last 3 years. One reason being that he heads a government in which there are two major parties, and these two major parties don't agree very much on many things.
Okay.
So whether he can get the support of his government is a question mark.
Okay, we're going to see that, but let me turn back to John for a second and let you respond to Omar. Basically, Omar had said that scientific studies have consistently failed to demonstrate that executions actually do deter from people committing these types of crimes. So, what's your response to that?
I mean, people can go to our website, crimeresearch.org. There's a long list of academic studies. In fact, the vast majority finds that for each execution, for example, the average effect is about 8 fewer murders that you're going to see.
Hold on a second.
We see this all the time.
There is no death penalty in the U.S. So what are you basing your studies on? There's no death penalty for drug-related crimes in the U.S. For drug-related crimes. Okay, there haven't been executions for drug-related crimes in the U.S. So where are you coming up with this?
I'm saying generally the death penalty, if you look at crimes like
No,
murder,
on drug-related crimes. That's
deterrent.
what the question is here.
Okay.
No,
look,
excuse me, 1 second, sir. 1 second, sir. When it comes to drug-related crimes, it is a violation of international law to execute people. You don't have that in the U.S.
Okay.
So where are you coming up with this?
With related to drug-related crimes,
I'm telling
John
you,
Lott, your
if
response?
you look at the effect of the death penalty on murders, the death penalty is an extremely effective deterrent there, and that's what I was referring to.
It's not an effective deterrent. It is
you
not a
see
uniquely
all
effective
the time,
deterrent. First of all, you need to make the distinction.
Okay, I don't know.
Okay.
Look, I'm just telling you, you can go, we have a list of papers. It's something like about 85% of the peer-reviewed academic journal studies find that, if you look at economists and criminologists, find that the death penalty deters murders.
All right.
And it deters some other types of violent crimes.
As this
And
debate
so,
between
look,
you two
and
goes
it
on,
not only does that,
let
but
me
it
just
also
bring back,
saves
let me
money.
bring our guest from Colombo, Jehan.
He spoke most of the
In terms
time.
of doctrine, isn't the death penalty sort of inconsistent with Buddhist teaching?
Yes, it is inconsistent with Buddhist teaching. I think it would also be inconsistent maybe with the teachings of other religions. But people think that in the real world, it actually is a deterrent, and probably it is a deterrent. I have not really done much research on this, but I guess it's a deterrent. The issue in Sri Lanka, however, is that probably, politically speaking, it will not go through because even the opposition is opposing it. We are worried. We have just come out of a long civil war in which there were a lot of killings, and we are before the UN Human Rights Council on and accused of war crimes and asked to go through a transitional justice process. Now, reinstating the death penalty at this time, when we are trying to reconcile, when we are trying to get out of a situation where there were so many killings in the past, I don't think it is going to really fly with the political leaders, because there would be a fear that once the death penalty is unleashed, at the moment for drug-related offenses, but it can then be extended to other things as well, because we do have the death penalty on the books, in the law books.
Okay.
So my guess is it will not happen.
All right. John Lott, let me turn back to you. And I understand that you're sort of making your comparisons with regards to capital punishment in the United States. Let's actually try to broaden our horizons, actually put Sri Lanka into perspective. The Sri Lankan government has said that it wants to sort of replicate the success of the Philippines. But the reality is what we're seeing in the Philippines are tens of thousands of extrajudicial killings. Won't this sort of open the door to a very slippery slope?
Well, it's not obvious to me. I mean, I hope people can differentiate using that type of penalty against somebody who's gone through the legal process and been convicted versus essentially having, a dictatorial type government there where, just on orders, somebody can be executed. So, I mean, either you have the rule of law or you don't have the rule of law. And that seems like a pretty bright dividing line. It's not obvious to me. I mean, the United States allows executions. That doesn't mean you have governors going and sending out hit squads to go and knock off people who they think are involved in the crime. If a governor in the United States tried to do something like that, he'd be in prison.
Okay.
You know? So I think there's a pretty sharp line there.
Okay.
But I just want to say, I mean, we see the deterrent effect in many ways. You look at plea bargaining. There are many times that in order to not have to go through a trial, a prosecutor will say, look, I'll take the death penalty off the table if you plead guilty to first-degree murder. And lots of court cases that would have been going through and taking up lots of resources are settled because the prisoner there, the criminal, wants to avoid any possibility of having to face the death penalty. You see the deterrent in many ways.
All right, Omar, I want to turn back to you. John was actually talking about sort of the rule of law and sort of the complexities of the U.S. judicial system. But don't you think when you take it from a look at Sri Lanka, we've seen this in the Philippines, that these actions, this law could potentially lead the police to quickly assuming the role of sort of judge, jury, and executioner?
Right, so a couple of things here. First of all, if you're talking about the rule of law, I'd ask your guests to recognize the fact that executing people for drug-related offenses is a violation of international law. It just is. When it comes to the question of deterrence, I'm not saying it's not a deterrent at all. What I said was it is not a uniquely effective deterrent. There are other ways in which you can successfully deter people without putting them to death, such as life imprisonment. That's what the studies have showed. No studies show that actually executions are the only way. Uniquely effective. There have been studies done on this, on the comparison between Hong Kong and Singapore.
Nobody said it was uniquely. I just said it was more effective.
Well, no, what I'm saying is it's not
I just
uniquely
said you have a
effective.
greater
there are more
deterrent
humane
effect.
ways to do this, okay? When it comes to drug-related offenses, sir, it is a violation of international law. So if we're interested in the rule of law, I think we should actually have a look at those commitments as well.
Okay.
On your point, when it comes to EJEs, extrajudicial executions, that is not using the laws, it's doing away with the law altogether. This is a recipe for disaster. I'm surprised that this example of the Philippines was shared amongst the Sri Lankan authorities. Probably I have to give them benefit of the doubt without actually looking into the issue a great deal. What we have seen in the Philippines is thousands upon thousands of people killed. Most of these people are, like with the death penalty, by the way, from the poorest sections of society. These are people who have not been even given a trial, let alone the chance to defend themselves in any sort of way. And so this is the police doing away with the law, breaking the very laws they're supposed to uphold, and unleashing the sorts of violence that has not been successful by any measure. In fact, it has led to an investigation by the Office of the Prosecutor for the International Criminal Courts.
Okay,
with
Omar,
human rights groups like Amnesty
I'm
International.
running out of time, but actually I want to get back, Jehan, in just a
humanity.
minute. I mean, why is Sri Lanka, the country, actually debating this in the first place? I mean, how big is the drug problem in Sri Lanka? And it's decided to actually consider these measures.
Well, it is a problem. Sri Lanka is believed to be a transshipment point, but I don't think it is that much of a issue. It is an issue, but the reason why I think the president has decided to say that he's going to restart executing people is because there is blame against him for not being a very strong leader. So I think he wants to show that he is politically strong, but actually in the end he will end up not being able to deliver on what he's saying.
Okay, John Lott, my last question to you is that Omar is saying that it is illegal under international law to sort of enforce capital punishment when it comes to drugs. Isn't this a violation of human rights?
Look, I'm not a lawyer. I'm an economist. I deal with data. I can tell you what's the more effective types of penalties that are there. With regard to human rights, I guess the question you have to face is their trade-offs. You have the people who are being harmed by the drug trade that's there. People being killed by drug gangs going and fighting against each other to go and control drug turf. And so politicians have to make a judgment over what types of penalties they can have to save lives for people who are harmed by the drug trade versus, what types of penalties you want to put on criminals.
You cannot save lives by putting people to death.
Okay, Omar, I'm going to give you the last word.
If you have a crime, you have murders, and you can deter murders, you save lives if there are fewer murders. That's what deterrence does.
John Lott,
If you've
Omar
gone and
Waraich,
created a
and
crime that-
Jehan
The right to
Perera,
life
thank you
is
very much for
absolute.
joining us
The right
here
to life is
on
absolute.
the Newsmakers. It is an interesting debate, but unfortunately we have run out of time. Thank you, though.